Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to today's presentation in our Collegiate Recovery webinar series. My name is Liv Pinelli and I'll be your host today. We're joined by Asia Brown and Shan Lagard from Baylor University, who will discuss their experiences as Black students in the realm of collegiate recovery. These webinars are hosted by the Association of Recovery in Higher Education in order to support the growth and development of the collegiate recovery field. Just a few reminders and logistics before we turn things over. Today's webinar will be recorded and we'll upload it to YouTube within the next few days and then put it on the ARHE website. So you'll be able to go back and access all the information at that point. If you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom and we'll get to as many as you can. Asia and Shan will let us know whether or not we want to do that as we go through the discussion, or if you want a period at the end. If you're having any technical difficulties or you've got logistical questions, message me in the chat box and put it to all panelists if you can. We're always looking for ways to improve, so if you've got any feedback or any ideas about topics we could cover, please let us know. And without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Asiana, also go by Asia, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. So as Liv already said, I do attend Baylor University, which is a Baptist university. So when it comes to addiction recovery, it's not really something on the forefront. Like, a lot of people are unaware of our services, specifically the Beecham Addiction Recovery Center, which I'm currently in, which is really wonderful. But we do have the BARC, and the BARC has actually been something that I very much treasure, because for so long I was ashamed of just all of my emotions, especially as a Black woman. Growing up was really weird as a military kid. If anybody can relate, I know Shan can relate. But growing up as a military kid, it brought on a lot of stresses and a lot of trauma in itself, especially secondary trauma when you have a parent come back from active duty and they have PTSD, and then it's like, oh, okay, how do we function as a family and as a child of somebody with PTSD? So with that, it led me into this being secluded a lot. I was very hesitant to reach out to other people. And so for me, I was very scared to even come into the BARC. When I discovered it on campus, it actually took one of my friends to be like, oh yeah, here's the BARC. I'm going to show up. Do you want to come? And I was like, I mean, if you're going, I might as well go. And so I was able to come into the BARC, and I met our wonderful faculty member, Lily Ettinger. And I love that woman. But she helped me become vulnerable, which is something I rarely see within the Black community, because again, trauma is such a big thing that when you are vulnerable, people take those vulnerabilities and use them against you. And so for me, in recovery from alcohol and marijuana, as well as self-harm, I was very secretive about my issues, about being vulnerable, because I didn't want people to see me as weak, especially as a Black person. Something that was discussed in one of my classes for racial disparities is how marginalized people have to work 2 times, if not more, to harder in order to actually prove their self-worth, or at least make it be acknowledged by the majority. And so I can attest to that. It had a lot of it had a really big impact on me, just simply being Black in a white space. And so recovery spaces, they don't form with the intent of helping marginalized communities. It's usually cisgendered white males that these spaces are occupied by. And so coming to Baylor, I was already aware that it was going to be a very white institution. I knew that chances were I'd be very unlucky to have a professor of color. And if I did, I treasured it. And granted, I do have minority professors this semester, which is really cool. I will never forget it. But being aware of this, that's another reason why I was so hesitant to come into the bar, because I didn't know who was occupying this space and I didn't know how freely I could talk about it. Especially with racism being so present. Like, racism is never going to go away. It's just something that we seem to cater to in a way that makes it less hostile, which is just baffling. Like, people don't understand racism is that. It's like, yeah, okay. Anyways, sidetrack. But yeah, so coming into Baylor and coming into the Bark, surprisingly, to my knowledge, the Bark is filled with students who are people of color. Like, this is probably one of the only spaces where I actually see people who are Latinx, who are Black, who are Asian, who are white. Like, everybody is just coming here and forming a community, which is very rare the more I hear the experiences of other Black students at predominantly white institutions. But with that, I got a lot more comfortable with speaking out about my journey in recovery. I actually did a little speech impromptu at a sit-in demonstration, because Baylor has a lot of its own things happening. And I officially disclosed I am a person in recovery. And what does that mean? That means that I have lived through some stuff. And so I was able to use that and amplify my voice as well as other people's voices who have been marginalized, and make change. Like, granted, the change is really slow when it comes to white institutions, and when it comes to people who are afraid to acknowledge racism for what it is, or transphobia for what it is. But when you realize that all these intersecting identities make an impact, and that's what really creates the community that we have, and it creates the family that we're looking for, recovery is the way to go for me. Like, recovery needs to be all intersecting. It needs to acknowledge everybody's identity regardless, and just amplifying the voices of people who just didn't know how to speak because they were too afraid to. But yeah, that's kind of like my little spiel. Granted, I probably have a lot more to say. I just don't really know how to process a lot of things with testing. But yeah, Shan.
Um, so like Asia and I are two different people, have had two very, very different experiences when it comes to recovery. Also, I apologize if you hear my roommate. She's about to walk in the door from class. Um, but so I am Shan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I too go to Baylor, and I found the Bark actually before I even set foot on campus as a freshman, and that was because Baylor requires that you do this alcohol like education like online like program thing before you even come. And at the end of it, there was this questionnaire that was like, hey, would you want to know about your school's CRP? And I was like, well, what is that? I don't know what that is. And so I clicked yes because I had promised myself that going into college, I would say yes to just about everything that first semester. And so I was like, sure, why not? Came, and it was great, and ended up getting involved with our student organization, the PAC, Peer Ally Coalition, and whatnot. And I was very aware of my Blackness outside of the Bark. Like, I was hyper aware of my race coming to Baylor because I knew that there weren't going to be a lot of us, and I was having to mentally and emotionally cope with that. And so when I finally did get to the Bark, I met Lily, who at the time was like 8 or 9 months pregnant and was actually about to leave to go on maternity leave. And from then on, I was just super, super involved. I didn't know a whole lot about recovery. I mean, I knew about my parents' struggles with alcohol and coming from a long line of people who have misused drugs. And so coming to the Bark helped further open my eyes. I did not consider myself to be in recovery until actually last semester when someone that I met, he's my friend. I'll call him a friend. When we met for the first time, he asked me if I was because he was sharing his story. And every time someone has asked me that, my answer has always been, oh no, I'm just an ally. Like, like I do a lot of things and whatnot, but like, it's okay. Like, I don't really like consider myself to be in recovery. And then last semester, when he asked me that, I was like, well, I mean, I guess. I was like, I go to Al-Anon. I was like, I never like struggled with substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder. I was like, but I have a lot of secondhand trauma, one from my dad being in the military, and then also his own struggles with alcohol, and also with my mom and internalizing a lot of that. And like Asia said, the park is probably one of the few diverse places on our campus. And it made me think about when Lily always mentions how the department that she works for is probably one of the few is like, I think one of like 2 or 3 departments on campus that is like not only made up of white people, and the other one being the multicultural affairs office, which you would hope is not just full of a bunch of white people. And so with that, I like my identity with recovery has been an ever growing one. It is something I am still figuring out for myself, because a lot of the times I do feel like I'm co-opting things. And because being Black, you are very aware of the own struggles that your community goes through, but then you're also aware of all of the other struggles that other marginalized communities go through. And it's like, I would hate to try to make myself like, I would hate to do what is done to me to another marginalized community.
And I actually want to add on to that, because when I reflect on discussions I've had with other Black students in recovery, not everybody is as lucky as Shan and I to be in a space that is so diverse in the recovery setting. Because even outside, like in Waco in general, when I do go to pre-COVID, when I went to open meetings, it was filled with white people, like old white people. And it was so awkward for me because I felt like I couldn't actually express myself the way that I wanted to express myself. And even in, there was this one AA meeting that I regularly attended. They had fellowship afterwards. And I always felt awkward attending those fellowships because it was just so one perspective. It was very much like, somehow it would turn political, and I was like, this is totally different than what I was expecting. So then I would start canceling, and I was like, that's actually impacting my own recovery, and not being able to talk about race impacts my recovery. The BARC, and I think in almost every meeting that I've attended at the BARC, I've always brought up something about race or something about gender issues that were happening. Like I'm always open about those things. And it's always welcomed with open arms. Like people will ask questions and stuff, and they'll be like genuinely curious, like, what does that mean? And like, how is this impacting you? Like, tell me more. And it's more of a like welcoming atmosphere versus going into a completely white room of older individuals who are just like, yeah, my granddaughter and all these things. And I'm like, I am in college. I don't have children. I'm not married. And so it was just really hard for me to relate with people outside in the bigger Waco community. And it's so funny too, because not gonna lie, I filed some complaints with Baylor because of just all of their issues and them not always wanting to speak up about these issues. But if there's one thing I am proud of, it is the wellness department and the Beecham Addiction Recovery Center. Like if I were to donate money, it would only go into the BARC. But yeah, it's just so interesting how it works that way, and how you can see the intentionality behind the bark and wanting to actually be inclusive versus saying, oh, we're diverse and just so happen to have one Black student that attends.
Did you see Jonathan's question, Asia? I can read it if that helps. So Jonathan says, Asia, thank you for sharing your experience with us. Powerful, inspiring, and courageous. Acknowledging how vulnerability can be exploited and punished is an example of how oppression can come from so many socio-cultural, psychological points of view. If you were to make your or any CRP better for African Americans, what would you do? Thanks.
Something I would definitely do is there's this racial healing workbook that I think every place ought to have if it's focused on any sort of recovery, whether it be from substance misuse or substance use disorder or like mental health issues. Racial trauma, for a lot of people without even realizing it, is actually a factor into why a lot of individuals end up in some addictive behavior. At least I can say that for me personally, a lot of the racial issues in America have perpetuated this idea of I'm not worth anything and like, why does it matter? Because nobody actually cares. And then you go into this cycle, and it's so interesting because Black History Month taught me so many new things, even though I'm Black, and like you would think I know it all because I'm Black, but no, that's not how this works. Education is a continuous cycle. And I learned that Malcolm X was actually a man in recovery, a Black man in recovery. But what people don't realize is the reason he chose recovery is because he saw addiction as the way for white people in power to keep the Black man down and the Black family down. And so I was like, that is such an interesting viewpoint, because you would think that it's always just like situational, but it's really institutional. It's institutionalized in so many aspects. And so having that ability to begin that racial healing within the recovery community is a vital part to me.
Shan, do you want to add anything?
I would say that like something that has always like come up is like with marginalized groups is like representation, and like not believing that you can do something or be something until you see someone that looks like you do it. And so it's like a lot of my peers at the park are like my example for that. But I think something that would also help would be having, because Lily and Stanton are great, but at the end of the day, they are also white. And they can only empathize and sympathize to an extent because they do not have the same lived experiences that we do when it comes to dealing with institutional and systematic racism a lot of the times. And so I think that if CRPs made more of an intention to hire more people of color that are in recovery, that would be a great help, because then it would also even help further the conversation of how do we further make this a place of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Just having that person of like, you can relate to me on an even deeper level than, and like actually understand the intersectionality of what it means to not only be in recovery, but also to be a person of color in recovery.
And something in my head is telling me, use your white perspective for a second, because if you don't know, a lot of Black people know how to code switch. And so with that being said, something that I can envision our white counterparts saying is that, wouldn't that be considered more of a division by only selecting people of color to be placed in recovery spaces that are in leadership roles? And when we view it that way, it's negating the fact that everybody has something going on in their life that they potentially need to recover from or want to recover from. And so like, even though we need that intentionality, that's not saying, oh, well, just because you're white, it's not like you need anybody. America was made for white people to thrive. I mean, don't get me wrong, we still have poverty, and that is a big issue. But at the end of the day, the way the system was created was for people who had fair skin to actually be able to achieve higher statuses than those of color. And so having that ability to visually see somebody who is representative of the Black community or even the Asian community or the Latinx community, having that visual representation encourages other students who are marginalized to actually want to seek help and actually seek recovery, because then they know, oh, it's not as stigmatized as I think it is. It's not as if somebody's going to look down on me because I'm in recovery and because I'm Black and because I'm a woman. No, it's because I decided to take power and control over my life, and I acknowledged when I needed help. And that's, I think, the strongest thing a person can do.
Does anyone else want to come in with some questions? I've got quite a few participants now. There's a podcast called Code Switch, isn't there? Have you heard about it? Yeah. I'm curious about your experience as the daughter of a military person. How do you think that's impacted your experience here?
Shan, would you like to start us off on this one?
I can. So, they always say that like one of the hardest things that like you can ever be is like a military spouse. I will raise you and say the hardest thing that you can do is be a military child, because, well, so my parents got divorced when I was young, and because of my father's status with the military, I did not grow up with my dad. I spent the first 14 years of my life living with my mother, and then right after I finished middle school, I moved full time with my dad, and that was when I was actually like fully immersed in military life, which was an adjustment because I had only ever been a civilian. And there were a lot of things that I just never knew about that were suddenly coming at me full force. Like my dad has like a lot of PTSD. He's been deployed like a few times at this point in his military career, and that has led to his alcohol misuse. And so there were a lot of instances throughout high school where I would do something and it would be like this big blow up about what I did. And I would be so confused. I'd be like, I don't understand what's actually happening. One thing I will never forget that really made it click in my head. My dad and I were in the kitchen, and I was doing something, like I think I was getting a pot or a pan because we were about to cook dinner. And I accidentally like dropped the pan on the floor, and it made this loud bang noise. And my father, I had never seen him like jump the way that he did. And when he jumped, he jumped and said to me, "Don't do that again." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, what's going on here, friend? This has never happened before." And so this added layer of being a military child, it's like you end up being privy not only to a lot of the trauma you end up enduring, but also the trauma that your parents ended up enduring. like outside of their like potential childhood trauma that they have, but just trauma from being in the military and what that means and what that looks like. And my dad, like, our house was the house that everybody would come to when they were moving between duty stations. And so then it was also taking in his friends' trauma and all of their experiences and whatnot, which I would say is a lot for a 15, 16, 17-year-old girl to be taking in, like, a few months out of the year. And so it was that added layer, it was those experiences that I had that also made me think, ooh, okay, these things are actually affecting me a whole lot more than I thought. And it wasn't really until I started coming to Al-Anon that I was like, oh, so this is why these things are this way. And for the longest time, I told myself that I never actually wanted to drink or do drugs. I was just like, I am absolutely terrified because I see what it does to my dad. I see what it does to my mom. And I see that added layer of my dad's trauma from being in the military. And it was absolutely terrifying. It is a very scary thing to go through and to also have to process and heal from, especially when it's more secondary trauma than your trauma. And also knowing that I unfortunately saw a quote today that made me sad, but it was actually true. And it was like, people that go to therapy also usually end up going to therapy for the people that refuse to go to therapy. And that hurt a little bit, because it made me think of my parents and how I'm having to work through all of my stuff I go through in my own life, but also all the things that in a way I witnessed them go through in their lives. And so being a military child is never fun, 0 out of 10, don't recommend. So, so, such a, like, simultaneously joyous and painful experience to live through.
Yeah, and for me, both of my parents were military. They both recently retired. I think my dad retired. I don't really know. We don't really talk about military life. It's too stressful. But what I can say is that my parents also divorced when I was young, but they were also very close knit and everything. So wherever my mom went, chances were my dad would follow like a year later. And so I did travel a lot, and I went across the country, I went out the country, all these different things. And so whenever people are like, where are you from? I'm like, well, that's a really hard answer. I don't know. It gets complicated. Like, do you want to know where I was born, where I graduated, where I grew up? I couldn't tell you. But with that, there's also a sense of lost identity for me, because it's like I had to adjust so many times that I don't even really know who I am as just a person, because so many people have their roots. So many people can say, oh, this is where I'm from. And I have friends from like elementary school and pre-K, but I can't relate to that. Like the friends that I had from elementary school, I only keep in contact with one person, and that's because I found her on a whim and was lucky that she remembered me. But that's not the case with everybody else that I've befriended over the years. And so even with that, there was this big sense of isolation. And that's kind of where it took a toll on me, because as a military kid, and as growing up as an only child, I was alone a lot. So I was alone with my thoughts a lot. And something that I grew up with, my mom is basically always wanting to excel. Like there's this airman core value of excel in all you do, or something like that. Excellence in all we do. There we go. Excellence in all we do is one of the airman core values. And so I'm like, okay, well, I got to be perfect. I got to do this, that, and the third, and make sure all my thoughts are in order, and make sure I turn in everything like very organized. And I, it's really funny when I think about it too. But growing up, my mom would use quotes from movies. And one of the quotes was from Matilda. And it's like vaguely saying, I'm big, you're small, I'm smart, you're dumb. And I was like, okay, and that's on period, like what she said goes. And so I grew up thinking like I have to follow in her footsteps. So for the longest time I thought, oh, I have to become an airwoman, like I have to join the
There's free Waco Chaw in the alley. Tapioca boba is ready.
there's boba. Okay, I'm sorry, I got really excited. It's Waco
And we
Cha.
have a girlfriend.
Okay, I'm sorry, that was really out there. But yeah, and so with having this my identity being so military focused, I joined ROTC in college. Like I was like, I have to do this. I have to follow in my mom's footsteps because that's the only way I'm going to succeed. Then they kicked me out and then everything went downhill and I was like, this isn't going the way I planned it. Like I didn't know what to do. And so I was so confused, and also having a mother with PTSD as somebody I also have PTSD from her PTSD, which is really complex in that manner, but also other childhood trauma. But something I would like to share is that when your parent goes into foreign territory and you don't know what to expect, I literally had dreams that I don't know if y'all know about this, but when somebody dies in combat or somebody dies like in the military and they're not in the US and you don't have any way to contact them, they send soldiers to your house in like this really pristine uniform and basically say sorry for your loss, your family member's dead. And I always had nightmares about that, and so that really stuck with me because growing up when you're 8 years old and both of your parents aren't here in America, like they're somewhere off in some faraway country that you don't even know about because you haven't learned about geography yet. it's it's really torturing and tormenting, and so that added more to my loneliness, and that added more into like, how do I feel this loneliness? And that's why I turned to alcohol and why I turned to drugs, and also the idea of perfectionism and all these high expectations. I was like, if I can't meet it, then what else can I do except for fall apart? And that's what I did for a very long time until I decided that something needs to change. And I finally made that change. It took me forever because I was like, oh, I don't have a problem like a lot of people before they enter recovery. I don't have a problem. I'm a functioning alcoholic, whatever that means. And so, yeah, it was definitely a major impact on my life being a military kid.
Thank you. Um, Jonathan says, Shan, I appreciate you sharing too. Black Queen Sisters in Recovery setting the tone for our field to recognise that Black recovery matters. Disparities across the collegiate recovery spectrum are a glaring issue we are all trying to face and address. I'm a CRP coordinator. What would you want CRP staffers to know or understand about being Black, being in recovery and in college? What would you want other students in recovery to know? Just a really great question. Who wants to go first? No pressure.
Oh, we could go all day, Shan.
No, I know. I would say that Lily does a great job of, when we tell her about the racist things that end up happening at Baylor, she just listens. And sometimes that's all we want, is for someone to just listen. We don't need you. It's great if you decide that's what you want to do, but we don't necessarily always need you to like try to figure out solutions for us, if that makes sense. Like we don't like, I'm gathering my thoughts simultaneously while also trying to say them, but like, you don't have to immediately like put your white savior cap on and be like, I'm going to fight this fight with you, because honestly sometimes maybe I just had a really hard day and like it's because I'm Black or it's because I'm in recovery. And I would say that like in college is hard, and unfortunately a lot of Black students are breaking a lot of generational patterns by coming to college. Um, and so that is something to keep in mind when talking about Black students in general, but also that added layer of Black students being in recovery, because not only are you now feeling like you're shouldering the weight of one, being Black, especially being Black at a PWI, but now you have attached yourself to another marginalized community, also on top of that, if you're a woman, and it becomes this, you eventually feel like you're drowning from how much weight ends up being on you because of all the different things that you are. And so I would tell CRP staff and to just listen to your Black students, and if they want your help, they will ask you for it. Because there are plenty of times when I've gone to Lily and been like, hey, I think this was kind of a racist thing that just happened to me, but I don't know if it technically was. Can you tell me what to do? Lily is also great for that. She knows a million people at this school. And I would say that what we want other students in recovery to know is that just because one thing I have always appreciated about the Bark, and it's something I have thought a lot about, is I consider the Bark to be my family. The Bark is the one space that I found in campus where I truly feel like I can wholeheartedly be myself. And a lot of that is due to the other students that I encounter in that space. Lily and Stanton play a big role in that. But at the end of the day, it's actually all the people that end up, all the students that just end up walking through that door. Like I saw someone today that I haven't seen in forever. And it was just like, hey, Shan. I was like, oh my God, hey, like I haven't seen you in so long. And it's just that comforting and that immediate, like you just immediate, kind of a joke on Black Twitter, but it's like when a Black grandma gives you a hug and it's like the hug that you have needed and you just start breaking down a little bit. Like that's what it feels like to be at the Bark with other students. And it's just like, what I would want other students to know is that, like Asia talked about vulnerability earlier, it is okay to be vulnerable. And I think that's what makes the Bark so great, is that we hold space for each other. We allow each other to be vulnerable. And we allow, usually everybody, like, I think that is one of the most intentional, like emotionally intentional places I have ever existed in. And it's just like with other students, it's like, I think it's just because we know how hard it is already to be a person in recovery, we just, regardless, automatically give each other that support and that comfort and that space to be vulnerable. And that is something I will greatly forever treasure, because I didn't think I was going to get it in college. I thought I was going to be in my little shell the entire time. But yeah.
A solid retweet to all of that, because I absolutely agree. And I was talking about this earlier. The Bark is basically like, and I'm not saying to get rid of your therapist, but it's basically my therapy session. Because something I've realized for me is that I find it difficult to connect with my therapist sometimes, because I'm like, you have a job, you know what you're doing in life, you do what you do and you make money for doing it. I'm just here spending money so I can do what I want to do in the future, and I'm still trying to work through that. But like, don't get me wrong, love my therapist, she's great. She does help me out through a lot of particular issues that I put forward, but it's not community within a therapy room or on a Zoom call for therapy. But like with the Bark, it's a it really is a community. Like it's something where it's very familiar, and a good familiar. Like again, that grandma hug that you just been waiting for. Because like sometimes I just get so excited to just visit the Bark. Literally, if I don't know if any other university does this, but Baylor has us doing weekly COVID tests. And so I don't show up on campus on particular days because I'm doing internship stuff at home. But if I'm on campus, I'm like, let me go stop by real quick. Let's see who's there and just say a quick hello and then skedaddle. And so like being able to just say, oh, I want to be in this space is so important. Having that welcoming environment. Because again, if you have addiction recovery on your door, chances are people are already hesitant to walk through it. And to be able to walk confidently through that door and be like, hey, how's everybody doing? And actually talking to people, love it, here for it, and will continue to support it.
Thank you. We've had another question, this time from Eric, who says, I currently am reaching out to students at Florida A&M University and HBCU to include them in recovery efforts at Florida State University, a PWI. What would either of you recommend in my fluid effort to ensure inclusion, specifically from one school to another? I don't know if Baylor provided that offering. If it differs from your earlier responses, by the way, I'm a graduate of both universities.
Use your connections to your advantage. Eric, you said you graduated from both, so use the people that you know at Florida A&M. And I will also say something that has also helped the BARC is we do stuff, well, pre-COVID, we did a whole bunch of events with other, I'm so sorry, Eric, but we did a whole bunch of events like Texas Tech and Texas Christian University, TCU. They're like the two main colleges that we do other events with. I think we've also maybe done stuff with UT. Usually it's because it's sports things. And so like fall of 2019, there were so many tailgates. Honestly, so much football. Oh my gosh. But like Texas Tech came, football. But like Texas Tech came, and that was a great way for us to connect with them. TCU has come a couple times. We even went to TCU's recovery banquet like spring of 2019. So if you have an event going on, invite them. Advertise it like crazy and be like, if you want to come. But that's probably one of the biggest ways I think that we've gotten around to connecting with other schools. I will say, I don't know if you are aware of it, but the Safe Academy created this app called Reconnected, and it's a way for people that are in recovery to connect with other people that are in recovery, and like it sets your location, and like based on that location you can see where other like recovery programs are and whatnot, and like who else is in your community. But yeah, it's called Reconnected. I think it's on the App Store and in like Google Play and the Android store. I can put it in the chat so that you can look it up again. But those are the things that I would recommend.
And something I wish I remember who said it, but they work at an HBCU and they said that something that really helps with that process is catering toward the intended population. I mean, that sounds really sus, doesn't it? But like but having graphics that actually represent what you are trying to portray, like, and not lying about it, also being honest about what you currently have and what you can provide. I'm trying to think. There was like also a way there, I know there's like so many different communities online that you can also talk to, but you have specific schools. So again, use your networking skills. Networking is important. But another thing, because it is a very weird time period, so a lot of the events that the BARC holds have been just thrown to the wind and forgotten about because we just don't know how else to do that. But having virtual events where it's allowing, I guess, everybody to just connect, because again, in-person things don't seem to be really big except for in Texas, because everything's bigger in Texas. But having those online opportunities might be beneficial as well. I do want to caution you that if you do decide to do something, especially on Zoom, I don't know if Zoom bombers are still a thing, but be very cautious about where you post and publish your information for these Zoom meetings, because I've been Zoom bombed. I didn't like it at all. It was not fun because racism is real. But yeah, definitely try and see what you can do with the, I guess, things you have in your availability at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, Eric says I totally agree about the bombers. Been there, done that. Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to add? I'm conscious we've got 14 minutes left, and you've already given us a lot of your energy, so I really appreciate that. Anything you want to add? I think I had one question, but I want to hear if you want to add anything, either of you.
I mean, I can do a shameless plug if that counts. So actually in the School of Social Work at Baylor, the Garland School of Social Work, I helped co-found a Black student association called Black Leaders Moving Social Work. And so we've been working really hard to network with fellow Black students, regardless of where they are in life, especially when it comes to social work, because Black social workers aren't very common. So we want to make sure that, you know, we got people doing that. But yeah, we provide like little tidbits and information and how to be anti-racist and inclusive and all these things. So if you think that might benefit you in some way as you try to build more inclusive CRPs and CRCs, feel free to just like follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. Both of the ats are blm.sw, which I'll also put into the chat.
Thank you. And Shan, is there anything you want to share? Any you want to make a plug or share any information? Not that you haven't.
Whenever I get asked about plugging things, I'm like, what do I do outside go to school and work? Geez, I feel like I have no life. If you guys would like, I am president of the BARCS student organization, the Peer Ally Coalition. We are always like looking to do more stuff with other organizations, other colleges, and so our Instagram handle I will put in the chat, but it is at Baylor Pack. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, that's all I've got. Liv, what was your question?
Oh, I'm just busy following you all. Making sure I'm following you all. My question, I think you may have already answered it. I was just I'm conscious of what you said too, you know, and I know that white folks should be doing their own work around white supremacy, and I'm conscious about what you said about white saviors. I'm wondering if there is anything you want to add about how white folks could be better allies, if you feel comfortable doing so. If not, that's also cool.
So something that I think is very important is compensating people for reliving their trauma. So I'm gonna drop my Cash App and Venmo into the chat. But yes, because again, it's that, oh my goodness, I've been taking this history and it's history of Black Americans in the US, and it's been so eye-opening. Like, I already knew slavery, but there was so much more to it. And just seeing how everything has been reliant on the Black body and the Black experience, it's important to acknowledge that and respect that. And so I always think compensation is a good thing.
Yes, pay us what we are worth. But also, I think something else that I would add is racism is exhausting, and something that Baylor has been having a lot of scandals with their issues of racism, and especially with Black students at Baylor. And so there have been protests going on in front of the statue of Judge Baylor, one of the founders of our good old university. And one thing I have appreciated about those protests is that every time I walk by him, is that it is not just Black students that are protesting. I have seen, based on the time that I usually go, I have seen a whole lot more like non-Black students that are there showing their support and protesting. And something that I popped up earlier when I had started talking about that was using your privilege to also help bring awareness, because it's like people that look like you are more willing to listen to you, because one, there are people in this country that don't even think racism is real. And by being someone that looks like them, they are quicker to listen to you than they are to me. And so I would say to also use your privilege and use that to also shoulder some of the weight that comes with having to constantly advocate for yourself. And also something that I've been learning in my disability at this class, a slight tangent, but that for marginalized groups, sometimes the most radical act that you can do is exist. Because we live in a society where for the longest times, we were not meant to exist in the capacities that we do. And so sometimes you are allowed, all the time actually, you are allowed to just exist. And this makes me think of something I heard from a long time ago, probably somebody's grandma used to always say, all I have to do is stay Black and die. And those are words that I try to live by a little bit every day.
Thank you. I was just searching for you, Asia, on Venmo. And Shan, do you want to put in your Venmo and Cash App for others? Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? I did make a note of the apps that you recommended and the 2 social media handles to follow. Does anyone have anything else they want to add?
I just had this random thought. Something I might start doing for speaker events when I'm a panelist is putting my Venmo as my name. Just be like, there you go, just in case you needed it. But that's really all I had to say.
Thank you. Okay, we've got some more messages. Yes. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, well, I'm conscious of how much time you've given us today. I just want to take, sure, Shan, go on.
If you guys want to, completely forgot, but ARHE now has a Black Indigenous People of Color group me. I will put my email in the chat if you would like to join it. Just shoot me an email and I'll send you the link.
And if you could send that to me too, Shan, I mean, I think I have it, but just, yeah, and then I can send a follow-up email to attendees. So that, I mean, that's all I really wanted to say. I just wanted to say, thank you. We really appreciate the time you've taken. To the attendees, thank you for also attending and participating. If you have any follow-up questions or feedback or ideas about future webinars, please feel free to reach out. The next webinar will be on the 10th of March, which will be a collegiate recovery spotlight on Minneapolis College. So thanks for joining us today and have a good night.